What the fuck was that? So, apologies, but also not sorry. Like, this is generally probably the most outrageous and most unfair opening of any episode of Weird Music, right? But I genuinely have no other idea how else to present this album to you viewers other than forcing you to do the entirety of the overwhelming opener that is Ferrari on Feu. Squelching electronics sounding like the grinding gears of motors of racing engines revving up to start the race of a lifetime. Genuinely incomprehensible and leaves me at loss for words. So rather than a try, I just thought I'd see what you make of all of this with this opener. So yeah, if you've made it this far, welcome to Weird Music. Today we're reviewing the debut album Feu Thérèse by Feu Thérèse. So yes, essentially at the time I was writing this review, I've been essentially going through a bunch of my favourite albums, trying to write out some thoughts so I could, present it on the show essentially. And I decided it might be fun to talk about one of the most absurd albums I've ever come across, Feu Thérèse. So yeah, I have wanted to discuss this one for ages. This is one of the reasons. This album here is one of the reasons why I start this show and discuss Fly Pan Am on the show and Shalabi Effect, because I wanted to get around to discussing the many different musical projects that all of these different people are involved with. So, of course, what's Feu Thérèse? Who are Feu Thérèse? Well, this is kind of like an offshoot of Fly Pan Am, following the 2003 release of N'écoutez pas in some respects, I guess. Feu Thérèse sees Fly Pan Am's Jonathan Parant joining forces with a peculiar roster of experimental Canadian musicians. Joined by the one and only Alexandre St-Onge, part owner of the brilliantly strange and unclassifiable Squidfucker Press, alongside Christophe Mignon, of course, as well as the solo performer and musician for an absurd number of projects, including the likes of the aforementioned Shalabi Effect. But as well, joined by one Luc Pardis, drummer, art designer, and vocalist. Interesting. Pardis, he essentially croons and sings over some of the band's recordings with some very bizarre French vocals that add a certain je ne sais quoi to the mix, right? But then, of course, we have one Stephen de Oliveira who performs a whole lot of nonsense, and apparently some vocals here and there, right? And together, they make up Feu Thérèse. A weird band with 2 albums under their belt, nothing more and nothing less. And this is truly an unclassifiable band for me. Weird sort of post-rock, krautrock from Canada, a blend of sort of proto-quiche style instrumentals against the thrum of bass and drums that push along at a bizarre pace. I don't know how to describe it. So yeah, of course, as mentioned, we are reviewing the debut self-titled album, Feu Thérèse, a strange 5-track album of unusual genre-bending instrumentals that melt your brain into a state of incomprehension. Dedicated to the one and only Luc Ferrari, an artist we have covered in the channel before when we dived into Presque Rien. So yeah, this is nothing like that record, of course, is it? This is a ferocious, baffling, playful, and oddly delightful record that never sits still, never adheres to any conventional norm. Very excited to discuss this, so let's crack on. So opening up with Ferrari on Feu, as you know by now, we are greeted with an electronic drone that rises up and up and up, just remaining in stasis for such a long time before briefly accompanied by the crashing of thunder it feels, which then leads the way for the Mario Kart race from hell. This is just the sound of what feels like engines colliding into each other into this rising energy travelling all up and down the notes on a synthesizer, it feels, just stretching it all the way to hell and back again. It is without a doubt one of the most intense openings to any track I've ever come across, and I remember many years ago when I first heard this just thinking, what the fuck is happening here? I mean, my goodness, this is just it's just absurd what they're all doing. This electronic deluge of motorized drones that ascend and descend in such a chaotic array. What is happening? I don't know. Why is this even going on? Who has any idea? But just when you think like you're gonna like, you know, truly crumble under the weight, out of nowhere, they suddenly start playing this weird peachy krautrock section of sorts. Lots of synths, noisy guitars, and this robotic structure from the bass and the drums. Very cool, and sounds nothing like what we have just heard here. Like, if the first half was the exploding of vehicles in Mario Kart, the complete and utter chaotic destruction that the game ends up with sometimes, then this is maybe like the menu music perhaps. Weird analogy, but it's just what came to mind when writing it. But yes, it is just, you know, it's just what this absurd opener creates for us as a result, I have to say. Opening with this though, you know, you open with an overloading delusion noise. It gets uncomfortably intense and anxious the more it stretches onwards. The more ridiculous as well that sudden change becomes. Like, I don't know why, but it's kind of like a 2001 Space Odyssey jump cut, the way you go from that crazy opener to just the song itself, I guess. It's so funny, and it just cracks me up every time. Yeah, it's what I describe as it being very playful in this kind of schadenfreude way, like for them. Like, I think it's just funny to make people to listen to all of that and then just go into this. But then again, even going back to the Fly Pan Am days, the band are always sabotaging their records. And here it's just such a wild ride through and through. And I remember when I first heard it, I just had no idea what to think. I just thought it was one of the most ridiculous musical things I'd ever heard in my many years of discovering, enjoying, reviewing chamber music and stuff. And when that change happened, I just thought, this is truly brilliant. This is so funny. But yeah, there's no way to ever make people listen to this, unless you're watching this video right now. Let's move on though. This is an entire album, so let's discuss the entire album, shall we? The next track of Mademoiselle Gentle. This one is kind of like a proto-Joy Division track maybe, with its sparse stabs of guitar, its driving drum and bass, but then accompanied by this weird guttural lo-fi garbling sound of sorts, you know, just making noises with your mouth. It's a very weird soundscape, and it just repeats over and over, really giving you time to sit with all the musical layers and tones. And it does move into some a few different sections, of course, you know, letting the guitars just play around on these very strange notes as the electronics just fly around all over the place, throwing the entire thing into pure abstraction. Very loose and freeform feeling, and yet it's still tied into this very odd rigid structure, I have to say. Very unusual. And it gets all the more confusing the more it goes on. Like, it just makes it very difficult to actually comprehend what's happening here. You know, it feels to me like this is one of the more biggest and loudest delusions you're getting from the band. The guitars just seem to fuzz away with this weird level of distortion while the bass robotically just bounces back and forth, letting the drums just frantically keep that pace going. All the while accompanied by a squeaking squelch of electronics. Absurd, as you know, all of this album is. And then as it all occurs, it's kind of giving you an indication of what to expect when it comes to this band in a sort of way. Not in terms of how it's literally going to sound, but like, you know, you kind of like, you get, especially after this one and the first track, you realise this band's doing a whole bunch of different things, aren't they? Like, you think you're getting one genre perhaps, something binary that falls into your set as a krautrock or post-rock perhaps, but none of it really is. It just keeps traversing the strange sound palette that's constantly being built, and keeps you just leant forward, anticipating what's going to be coming, with no way to predict it in any way whatsoever. And so on the ways, they just pull you into the strangest of sound world, making it a really baffling musical experience, but one that's so oddly intriguing as a result. This one does have a bit of a change though. It does have a dropout as the drums begin this new beat, sort of, I want to say 2/3 of the way into the track. It lets the bass momentarily play this weird melodic low end, creating new space for abstract guitar notes, and a momentary emerging of a new scene. But just when you think you're going to get comfortable with this, that sort of weird screaming starts again, recalling the terrifying horror of the track's first half. And then it becomes a weird interplay of having phrases with the voice and phrases without, to just let the guitar do some bendy-wendy notes over it. It's kind of a cool ending, and it kind of continues this sort of anxious journey of uncertainty and bewilderment, a strange yet fitting way to sonically ride the song off into its furthest depths as it just progresses along. Next, we get track 3, Tu ne avais qu'un Oriel. I do apologise for butchering the saying, sorry. But yeah, this is I mean, they're all weird, but this is a really weird one. But this is weird for its own reason, of course, just like the first 2 tracks are weird for doing their own thing. This one is when you get the first instance of actual vocals, and I believe this is actually Stephen de Oliveira singing on this one, giving us this really weird baritone vocal situated all the way at the bottom of the registers, essentially, as the guitars just strangely accompany that rhythmic structure once again, letting the pedals lull the notes around so nicely. And this one, it's very weird, of course, but it's kind of a vibe for sure, I have to say. Something and it makes us one of the coolest tracks off this entire album. And the vocal is kind of nice in its own weird way. It's almost shoegazy, perhaps, I would argue. But it's just cool how the band just pushes the musical motifs along. Like, the guitar just has so much room to just try so many different things the more it all goes along. And there's even a semblance of some kind of chorus that suddenly makes an appearance, where the band all vocalise and feels, adding nice layers to this harmony that gives this kind of weird western cowboy aesthetic that seems to crop up out of nowhere all of a sudden. It's very cool though, and one of the coolest parts of the song. And it does lead the way into a sudden descent into a much more sort of krautrock section of sorts. This urgent feeling all of a sudden, and it still yet finds room for all of those vocals once again, even at this more frenetic pace. Very bizarre, and to me, it just kind of showcases that weird brilliance that Feu Thérèse have as a band. Just creating the very odd, rigid structures of music with the most abstract of sound designs. It feels. Like, I especially like how the guitars just loosely fall in and around all of those effects pedals, and yet still adhering to that rigid structure almost. Super weird, but it's really cool to hear, I think. And I love how locked in they all are, playing this very strange set of wonky music. It's very cool, and I actually love as well how this one gets very heavy towards the end, where the guitar really pushes out that distortion in such a cool way. It becomes a sonic overload, but one that's very cool, hidden right away at the back of this song that's opened up in such a very weird way to begin with. A great example of the esoteric and ever-changing nature of this very album itself, how it just navigates so many different sections to all the different songs. Next track, the penultimate song, Le Homme avec cœur avec elle. New song, new vibe. And what do we have here? Kind of like a driving vibe again, back into the Mario Kart Raceway, perhaps, that. I think it's perhaps the interplay between the synths and the guitars at the beginning that make it such a bit of an odd opener, especially with the drum just playing behind it all. It's a very weird pace, but they make it all work so nicely, like driving with the windows down. And I love how dominating the synths are here, as it even has some lovely interplay between the drums at some points. But after the bewildering nature of the rest of the recordings, this one just kind of keeps you on your toes as it just falls into pure abstraction almost, before changing the whole vibe with this lovely little synth section to just close off the whole track. It seems to sound a little bit sad and oddly emotional though, like something strange and bewildering hidden away at in this album that beautifully turns into another sort of kind of western vibe all of a sudden, accompanied by a very cool sounding saxophone performance, which apparently was by one Philippe Lauzier. A lovely section that the song finds itself at, and for an album that seems to bombard you with the most overloading of strangest musical occurrences at times, it does feature some wonderfully cool sounding moments as this kind of track demonstrates, I feel. It's perhaps the strange quality in the music that draws me all towards it though. It's a very playful band, really experimenting with such an array of instruments to create such an odd album. And yet alongside these strange overloading moments, there's some very cool ones too. It's like, you get it all with Feu Thérèse. You get some of the strangest and oddest music you'd ever listen to, and you never know exactly what you're going to get. It could literally be anything. Some of the most baffling and bewildering stuff, and then some of the coolest stuff as well. Like, I don't know why, but this one has such an amazing vibe to it, and I think it's one of the coolest tracks they've done. But yeah, I just adore how this one just rides off so nicely into the sunset, especially with the final section of it as well, even as it lets these very strange electronic occurrences happen alongside it. Very unique and strange music, and I find it so fascinating for so many reasons, and yeah, definitely one of my favourites off this album, I have to say. So, final track. Ce n'est pas... let me try again. Ce n'est pas les jardins du Luxembourg. God, I can't speak French, I do apologise. So yeah, this one opens up with a very strange SOS type of occurrence of electronic bleeps, reminiscent to the opening to Echoes by Pink Floyd perhaps. But Feu Thérèse, of course, are going towards the stranger, introducing brief moments of new layers that change up the soundscape into this very strange experience. This one feels very oddly minimalist, very reduced down, which is perhaps a bit of a surprise after the sort of urgency that so much of the album has been presenting up to this point. And you even get a very interesting sound palette occur when faint drones occupy the scene, alongside digital generated bird sounds provided by Stephen Oliveira, apparently. It ends up rising up, becoming more of a dominating factor as it loops over and over, changing the scene from sparrows to seagulls. Why seagulls, I don't know. And so you think, okay, it's time to hang out at the beach then. This kind of weird beach. Only for Feu Thérèse to say, nah, let's have some more drums, more guitars, and fire away towards the end of this thing, right? And when the band all comes in, you kind of have this odd tribalistic momentum that drives itself along, accompanied by a strange miasma of sounds all occurring alongside with it. Very bewildering, and it becomes very difficult to really comprehend the particulars as the album is mostly an overloading experience, especially by this point as well. You've had so much happen that it's hard to know what's even going on by this point. But all the same, this one is very cool sounding. I just love the freeform abstraction of experimentation, improvisation that seems to come from a band that sounds, well, just like this one, right? I mean, they can do whatever it is they feel like doing, and even if the end result is something that doesn't feel like makes much sense, it's still something very cool. A musical soundscape that is naturally abstract in terms of its presentation. But I adore that. I kind of love just never knowing what it is they're going to do with their music. As they introduce new strange experimental layers, only to then fall into rhythmic structures, like it just results in something that's fascinating and bizarre, and yet so weirdly different. But yeah, with this one, it sounds very spacey and almost shamanistic, perhaps, especially with that glider guitar and the sort of weird processed vocals. Like, it's a very strange soundscape, but very much in keeping with the very strange style that the band have pushed out on this debut. Like, it's such a weird album to have made, and it's one that's very difficult to really hone in on. But I guess it's just one of the things about these guys and their musical projects, not just as Feu Thérèse, but as Fly Pan Am, as solo artists, as collaborators in other bands. It stretches out into this weird, infinite discography of music that goes everywhere. And so to kind of explore on that a little bit more, as mentioned, I always mention how I started this whole series with Shalabi Effect, with the intention of talking about all the various bands that we're all interconnected with. It's why we also discussed Fly Pan Am, we've discussed Alexandre St-Onge, and the idea is to talk about more of them so I can cover a whole bunch of the different things they do. Like, it connects to so many different bands and labels. Like, you've got Godspeed You Black Emperor that's connected to, Set Fire to Flames, Shalabi Effect, Squint Fucker Press, of course. And it's a very, very deep rabbit hole. But I think the issue with it is, it's a bit too deep for me personally to have heard absolutely everything. But I think I have heard a fair bit. And I want to talk about some of these strange bands that shoot off from the likes of Fly Pan Am. Starting with Feu Thérèse here, I think is a very great place because this is one of the most weirdest and bizarre albums that I have ever heard. But it's one that always stuck with me and really helped in getting me interested in all of the many different side projects featured on Constellation Records, and from there, all of the different labels that they've involved in, like Alienate Records, Cranky, Squint Fucker Press, of course. It feels like so long ago since I discovered the music from that very label, is where the genesis was of it all, and it was always fascinating discovering new music from all of these little tendrils that stretch off from it. It certainly helped me discover this wealth of music that spreads far and wide into the experimental Canadian scene. Very cool. And this one, this strange little offshoot of Fly Pan Am perhaps, very cool in my books, and one of my favourites, even though it makes absolutely no sense to me. And so yeah, I think with that we've actually come to the end of our episode of Weird Music there. Yeah, a bit of an oddly formatted one, but then again some of them aren't they? But that's fine. But I'm glad to have talked about one of my favourite albums. I don't know why I didn't include this one on my list of top favourite albums, but that's fine. Not everything made it onto that list for some reason. It might be worth just doing a follow-up list with a bunch of other albums that I adore as well, but who knows, I don't know if people want that. Anyway, this one, truly brilliant though. And as mentioned, yeah, I've always wanted to try branch off into the world of Canada's experimental scene with the many different bands and artists that are all connected to these very strange little albums. This one, super weird to me. Such a strange thing to have been released, but it kind of makes weird sense in the context of the kind of things that the band members are always doing. Always pushing their boundaries and perspectives of music really delving into sound art the more we explore their works, while still falling into the rigid structure that maybe a band offers in context of this particular one, perhaps. I don't know. It's all very weird. I can't quite get my head around it all, but I just know I love it. And it's always been one of my favourite bands and artists and albums I've discovered on Constellation Records, and without a doubt one of the weirdest and strangest things to hear. To go even weirder though, there is one more album under the Feu Thérèse banner, Ça va cogner, and nothing prepares you for what that album sounds like, because it sounds nothing like this album in any way, shape or form. It might be worth doing a follow-up and discussing that one, because it's very funny in its own way, I have to say. Like, when I first heard it, I was expecting more sort of experimental sound art in vein of this one, and that's not what Ça va cogner is at all. But it is brilliant in its own right for just existing exactly as it is, essentially. More on that another day, though. As mentioned though, yes, we will try to discuss more some experimental Canadian music though. We do have a video that is planned on Et Sans, a collaborative band between Alexandre St-Onge and Roger Tellier-Craig. We'll see when we get around to getting that one. Could be worth discussing Squintfucker again. It'd be worth discussing more from Constellation Records. I'm surprised that this is like the second one we've done so. Like, we definitely need to do more of that, don't we? But regardless, we will see in the future. With that, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. I wish you all the best. Take care, and bye-bye for now.